There we go. Hello. Good afternoon, Diane.
Good afternoon, Anna.
Lovely to be joined by you today. Really excited about our conversation. So for everybody who's joined us, thank you very much for joining us for the next 30 minutes, where we're going to be talking to Diane all about how to effectively support disabled employees. Now, for those of you that have joined any of these LinkedIn Lives before, you'll know that this is targeted purely at managers. So we want this whole series is about supporting managers to be the best they can in, let's be honest, a very tricky role where you're responsible for getting the best out of everybody. And we work in very, very diverse workforces, which is brilliant. And with that, we need to ensure that managers feel comfortable with everything. So for those of you that don't know OpenBlend, my name is Anna. I'm the founder and CEO of OpenBlend. Our software we're in next generation performance management, but we support managers to have really effective, really valuable one-to-ones with their employees. And when I say next generation performance, is that we support conversations that go beyond objectives. So we look at an individual's well-being, we look at an individual's motivational drivers. So wrapped up in all of that is the individual, but hence this conversation today being so valuable. I'm really looking forward to it. So Diana, would you like to introduce yourself and the Business Disability Forum?
Sure, and lovely to be here. Thanks for having me, Anna. So I'm Diane Lightfoot. I am CEO of Business Disability Forum, which is a not-for-profit membership body that works with over 500 businesses of all shapes and sizes from the private, public and voluntary sector. And we support them to get better at recruiting and retaining disabled employees and also at serving disabled customers. And we provide very practical, pragmatic support wherever you are really on your disability smart journey. And I think the message I'd like to get across in this session is that supporting disabled colleagues doesn't have to be difficult. And we see so often that when it comes to D&I, that disability often gets put in the too difficult box, too sensitive, and people are just worried about getting it wrong. And I really hope that in this session we'll show you that you don't have to be worried about it, and there's some really simple things that make a difference.
Yeah, well, if we achieve that in 30 minutes, what a powerful session that we've just delivered. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. So what about your journey, Diane? Why how come you are now the CEO of such an important organisation?
Oh, well, thank you. I've been CEO for coming up for 6 years. And before that, I spent 13 years at a learning disability charity called United Response. And my very first interest in disability, if you like, was way back, when I was 19, 30 years ago, when I worked on a children's holiday play scheme working with kids with learning disabilities and autism. And it wasn't a kind of a client group I'd ever thought about. And I made some really amazing connections. And so then I went away, finished at university, got a job, thought marketing looks kind of fun, got into marketing, and then decided that actually I'd like to work for the charity sector. And then many moons later, I thought I really want to be working closer with beneficiaries. And I saw this job that was working for a disability charity. And I've kind of never looked back. And the reason I'm so interested in employment was I saw through the United Response employment services so many people getting a job for the first time, maybe 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And these are people, I expect we'll talk about the breadth of disability, who are kind of faced with the biggest challenges to employment. But seeing how their lives were transformed, having an independent income, obviously, but also those other things we take for granted, like friends, social life, identity, it was amazing.
Yeah. Fantastic. That, I mean, what a a brilliant journey to get to where you are. And I mean, I've had the benefit of speaking to Diane before we've been live on here. So and something that really fascinated me when we first started talking was the Equality Act definition of disabilities. So can we start there? Can you let's kind of lay it all out, because I think this is fascinating and a brilliant platform for us to then build on. So what is the Equality Act definition for disability?
So the Equality Act 2010 is still the relevant legislation. And the definition is a physical or mental condition which has substantial and long-term impact on your ability to do normal day-to-day activities. So what does that mean? Well, long-term means over 12 months.
Right.
Substantial means more than trivial. There is no definition of exactly what substantial means. I'm not kidding. This is the law. It means more than trivial. So it's extremely subjective. And although it's really important to know the definition, I always say to people, just don't get hung up on it. So understand that the definition of disability is much, much broader than lots of people think about. So lots of people I talk to about disability immediately think about physical disability and think about wheelchair users. And of course that's important, because it's ridiculous that nearly in 2023 we don't routinely design buildings to be physically accessible. Actually, only about 8% of disabled people are wheelchair users, and that definition also includes sensory loss, mental health conditions, long-term conditions like cancer, MS, HIV, diabetes, long COVID even, and neurodiversity. So dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, autism, that is all covered in the definition. So over 90% of disabilities are not immediately visible. And so I will say to people, you probably already employ many more disabled people than you realise. And the reason I say don't get hung up on a definition is if you took that definition of long term as being 12 months, if you've got an employee who tells you they're struggling because they've got a really bad back, you're not going to want to wait 12 months before you buy them whatever it is they need, whether it is a sit-stand desk or a special chair or, some other ergonomic kit. After 12 months, when it's probably miles worse, actually it's just about enabling people to be productive and to thrive. So that's the message I'd rather get across. Be aware of the law, but don't get hung up on it.
But because it's so, and I think your main objective for this session is to kind of demystify it and kind of remove any fear of it. But actually, just from saying that, how subjective it is and how broad it is, and actually what I've just taken for that is anything that exists over 12 months and is more than trivial.
Yes.
So there is actually there is a lot of unknown there, isn't there? Because this is just sort of my perception of this, but I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people. When you think about disability, absolutely, as you said, you're thinking about a physical disability, but 90%, just to repeat what you said there for people, 90% of disability is you can't see it.
Yes.
Is that right?
Over 90%. And I say not immediately visible rather than invisible, because somebody might have, say, a discrete hearing aid that you don't notice to start with, and then once they point it out, you think, okay, so you might be able to see some of it, and you might be able to see it in people communicating differently or not making eye contact or those sorts of things, but it's it doesn't come blazing in as look, I have an obvious disability. And one of the big challenges is getting people to talk to you about it and to tell you if they need something different.
Well, this is what I was going to say. So as managers are listening, obviously I've said that this is focused for managers, but probably managers listening into this now thinking, gosh, I've probably got people in my team with a disability and I've never even thought about it in that way. What do you think the main challenges are for managers today when managing or supporting team members with disability? So you mentioned there about talking about it. What do you think the main challenges are? Of knowing whether or not somebody does have a disability, and then if you are aware of that. So I'm sorry, I'm asking you quite a few questions in one here. But so what the main challenge is, and I think maybe focusing first on if you maybe suspect something, or how do you overcome that as a manager?
So there's lots of questions there. I'll try and cover them. If I don't, feel free to prompt me, Anna. So firstly, you might be thinking, does it matter if you know? And it might not. If somebody is coping perfectly well, able to do their job, if whatever condition they've got does not impact them at work, then fine. You might want to know for other reasons, because lots of organisations are trying to get better at data capture, trying to identify where maybe they have gaps in their diversity, profile and statistics. But more often, it's about giving somebody the space to tell you what they need. And if they don't feel able to do that, then they might be at best coping, but or at worst really struggling, working around. Masking or covering is absolutely exhausting. So if you're trying to conceal, and we hear this quite a lot, people who have to take a lot of medication and want somewhere private to do it, obviously working from home makes that easier, or have a lot of appointments for health conditions or for managing fatigue or pain. So I think the biggest challenge for managers is getting people to tell you, because so often, I'm sure this won't surprise your listeners, people are so worried about how they will be treated if they say that there is something different. And we carried out a survey, which we're repeating actually, called the Great Big Workplace Adjustments Survey.
Okay.
And workplace adjustments are really just something different that somebody needs to do their job well. So it could be a piece of kit, like we just talked about, like, you know, ergonomic or assistive tech. It could be different working patterns. It could be a fixed desk in a hot desk environment, all sorts of things, and often very small. So we carried out this survey of 1,200 employees, and 34% of them, so over a third, and these are disabled employees, said they hadn't asked for an adjustment that would have helped them, because they were worried their manager would treat them differently. And the figure was almost the same for people who were worried that their team members would treat them differently. So that's over a third of these disabled employees who were not as productive and not as happy as possible. And to illustrate that, I heard a really sad story actually quite recently from one of our members. And it was the D&I lead who'd been told by an employee that she was deaf in one ear, but she hadn't told her manager, and didn't want to tell her manager because she was worried about how she'd be perceived. And we sort of talked about it a bit, and it was a hot desk environment, and she coped with being deaf in one ear by always making sure she sat next to the window so that her deaf side was next to the window, so no one could come up and surprise her. And so we then said, we unpicked it a bit, and I said, does she always come in early? And this person said, well, yeah, she does. And then we thought, imagine the anxiety and the stress every day of worrying that you're going to get that, whether you're going to get that desk or not, and that someone else might have beaten you to it or taken it as a joke or something like that. And yet the risk of telling her manager, just, could I have this desk, seems so simple, doesn't it? But the risk felt too big.
Could you share with us what she was worried about in that? Because I find it staggering that today, you know, what was it that she was fearing her manager was going to do or say or treat her? Because I find it's sad.
It is. I've not met this woman, so I don't know, and I don't want to project, but people are worried about admitting a difference, about admitting anything, and admitting, I should do air quotes with, really, because it's nothing to be embarrassed about, actually. Anything that could be perceived as a weakness, that might mean, hopefully misguidedly, that they might be overlooked for promotion or not given the same opportunities. And we hear it so often, people saying, you know, if I say that I've got X, Y, or Z, I might not be thought of as a credible person, which surely, particularly in this day and age, should be absolute rubbish and ridiculous. It should just be, you know, it's part of the human condition. It's part of who we are. So as a manager, you can't make somebody tell you if they don't want to, but you can do a few things that might help. Brilliant. So the first is talking about disability and difference, making it part of an ordinary conversation. So something
neutralizing it. Yeah.
Exactly. Neutralizing it, making it kind of just an ordinary part of a conversation. So talking about at team meetings, talking about your own lived experience if you've got one, or that of friends or families. Again, that can make it feel okay, particularly when senior managers do it, makes a massive impact. You could talk about things like adjustments that are possible, give examples of how other people work. And in a case like this woman who sat by the window, as a manager, you could say in a one-to-one, hey, you know, I've noticed that you always sit at this desk, or I've noticed that you always come early. Is that to get this desk? Is there a reason why? And you can try and open up a conversation. And you can't force it, but you could then say, if there's a reason why you need to have this desk, we could make that your fixed desk, and try and open up a conversation. But just creating that environment where people feel a bit safer, really, which takes time and it takes trust.
So talking about safety there, so if there is quite a junior manager, and they want to open up that conversation and do everything that you just said there, which is supportive and thoughtful and kind and with the individual's best interest at heart. And then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect that 99.9% of managers are very, very well intended. I've got positive intention. But what they're worried about then is where the conversation is going to go, because that's an unknown. So they can go in prepared with their questions and their thoughts, and then they're sitting in that moment and they don't know what's going to come back at them. Have you got any kind of support for managers once they enter into that conversation, and how to be more comfortable, in a dialogue where they might not know where that's going to go?
Sure. Yes, and you make a very good point, particularly about newer managers. This is, it's a tricky area. I think, firstly, remembering that you absolutely do not have to be an expert in a condition.
Yeah.
So what you are focusing on in these conversations is the impact on somebody at work.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody has an energy limiting condition, something say like MS. You do not need to be an expert in MS. You might choose to find out about it if you want to, but what you need to know is that somebody perhaps needs regular breaks, or they experience a lot of fatigue, so it would help them to work from home some of the time, or to work slightly different hours so that they can, work at times when they have more energy. So you don't need to be an expert, and often the employee will come up with suggestions that are simple and practical.
Yeah.
I think as well, it's really important that managers know where to go internally to get support.
Yes.
So I gave that example of a fixed desk in a hot desk environment. A junior manager may not feel that they are empowered to make that decision. So knowing where to go to get a decision and to get it quickly is really important. And the best organizations have a centralized workplace adjustments process and budget. So in a case where the bad back case, say somebody says, actually, I've got a really bad back, I need a different chair, that the manager says, right, I know where to go for that. I'll go to HR and they'll say, we will fund that for you. We have a supplier that can get that for you, and we can turn that around pretty quickly. And in that case, the manager's role is very much the conduit and also keeping the communication going. So I think it's also okay to say, I don't have the answer right now, but this is important. I'm going to come back to you, and I'm really glad that you told me. And just trying to keep the conversation alive, really.
Yeah. Because it does provide, but you knowledge is power, isn't it? You're going to feel much more confident if you're going into something knowing what is available. So if you go to this is all underneath in the people team, is it? So this is all under the HR team. So if a manager might suspect something, they can go to their HR team and say, I'm going to open up this conversation. What can we do as an organization? How does that work? What's the process? So if I'm in that conversation, I feel more knowledgeable, and that would equip, make people feel a bit more comfortable, wouldn't it? Knowing that they've got that there.
Definitely. And one specific survey we carried out for one of our members around mental health.
Yes.
And we were really pleased to see that managers, and it was kind of middle ranking managers, actually have pretty good awareness around mental health, much better than they said they'd had a few years ago.
Yeah.
But when it came to knowing how to get practical support or where to go, the scores immediately went down. So whoever leads those processes, and it needs to be communicated from the top as well, knowing where you can go to get this and knowing what's okay and what you're empowered to do is really, really important. And but not being afraid to ask the questions, though, even if you don't have all the answers, because that will start it off.
Yeah, and that is a very, very endearing quality about anyone being curious about something, isn't it? You're going in and it's absolutely knowing that you don't need to know anything about it. If you're managing someone who has got MS, to use your example there, you're just sitting down and understanding it and asking someone how they'd like to be supported, and what can I do as your manager to support you? What can the business do to support you? Asking questions around that. Okay. So, and I think that this is a common trend, I think, is that organizations might look at something on a strategic level. So they might have, a D&I strategy, and reflect that in their values, and have that reflected in everything they do. But actually at the coalface of that is the manager. So how is the manager supported in order to really drive inclusion on a micro and individualized level? Because there's a difference between the macro and strategic and the micro. So in your, I think you said 500 organizations that you work with, do they ask you to go in and do some manager training and support and do some work around managers?
They sometimes they do, and typically what they want to know about is workplace adjustments. I know I keep talking about that, but they really often are the key. We provide a whole load of information and toolkits. So we have a people manager toolkit, which is precisely aimed at non-specialists to guide through a conversation. So it will talk about how to approach a conversation, about not being an expert and not having to be an expert, and also gives advice like if rather than trying to guess who might need a conversation, if you routinely say to every employee, what do you need to do your job well? What do you need to do the best possible job for us? Then that becomes a conversation around productivity and is much more neutral. But we also have an advice line. I don't want to just be sort of plugging our things.
No,
so any manager can call. So we get a lot of calls that are, I've got somebody in my team that their performance has changed, or they are behaving differently, and I think there might be something going on, but I don't know what to do about it or how to approach a conversation. And then it's entirely confidential. We'll then kind of walk them through it, ask them more questions about what they're seeing, what's happened so far, tell them how to approach a conversation, but also then guide them into where to go to get extra support.
Right.
And I talk about workplace adjustments, but under the Equality Act, they're called reasonable adjustments. We prefer workplace because it's much more neutral, but there are tests that you can go through to work out whether something is reasonable. So cost is one, impact on other people is another. And again, we can guide you through those. But I think it's worth restating that so many adjustments that people need are so simple and cheap, if not free. So again, thinking about the woman who was deaf in one ear, just saying you can have a fixed desk, but it also might be that in a conversation, she might have said, actually, it really helps me in a meeting if the speakers can be facing the light so I can see their faces, because I lip read a bit to support what hearing I do have. So as a manager, just remembering to mean that person is seated somewhere she can see people, and as a manager to remind other people not to speak over each other and not to put their hands in front of their mouths when they're talking. That's really simple. So a lot of it is within an individual manager's gift to just do.
And sometimes it's ongoing dialogue about and offering that support, and just being someone who can listen and and I think you used the word sharing, so conceal versus sharing. So it must be such a lift of a burden if you're carrying something, just knowing that you can sit and talk to your manager about it, and you might need to go for different appointments and things like that, because based on what you just said around a disability, it could be a cancer, and it could be cancer treatment, and actually supporting those kind of conversations. But it's interesting because I don't think a cancer patient would ever think that this is a disability.
No, and there are so many people who would fall under that Equality Act who would never identify with the term disabled. So people who are neurodiverse, for example, often wouldn't. People with a mental health condition often wouldn't, but might still need support, which is why that whole kind of what do you need thing is really important. And also knowing your people, because if somebody is not themselves, I'm sure people listening to this would just naturally have a conversation that's are you okay? And it doesn't have to be sort of loaded into, oh, well, now I need to ask them about disability or health. It's just, you don't seem yourself. Is there something else going on?
I absolutely love your question there, and this is absolutely, this is what Open Blend is about, and I think this is why I kind of get excited about sort of the work that you do as well, is because absolutely everybody is an individual, and everybody is going to need different things to support them to do their job well. One might, it might not be about a disability. It might be someone who works much better in the mornings than they do later in the afternoon. So, arranging meetings where they're going to kind of be on better form, and just understanding what an individual needs on an individual level in order to achieve the same thing. And just having that conversation, becoming, as a manager, understanding that everyone's different, everyone's going to have different needs. And then when you do need to respond, with any kind of adjustment, or you need any more support, then actually as a manager you should know what that route is. So would you encourage anybody who's on the call to, if they should be able to, get off this webinar now and walk into their HR teams and their people teams and say, right, what's our policy? How can I, and equip themselves with that information? Should everyone be able to do that?
Well, I'd hope they would. And if they are going to do that, so if you're listening to this and you're thinking about that, I'd go to your HR team and say, what's our workplace adjustments policy and process? Right. And if there isn't one, then you need to get one. And it doesn't have to be difficult, but that's the question that I think I'd urge every manager to ask, so that when they do have those conversations and somebody says, actually, I do need whatever it is, they know exactly where to go and how to get the support.
Workplace adjustments policy, and that and irrelevant of the size of the organization. I mean, your 500 organizations that you work with, do they tend to be larger? Are they completely spread?
Lots of them are very large, but we have SMEs. So we have the likes of, Unilever and HSBC, which are pretty big by most people's standards.
They're pretty big.
Microsoft. But then we have local authorities, we have NHS trusts, we have universities, and we have small businesses. And the principles are the same. And I would bet that many people listening to this are already having those conversations and are already making workplace adjustments. They just don't call them that.
Yes. Yeah. And they should take confidence from that.
Absolutely. I mean, good managers who know their people and want to support their people are almost certainly already doing this, but just aren't aware of it. So it's not difficult.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So, just as a kind of wrap up question, you mentioned then about the People Manager Toolkit. Is this something that is online and available for anyone to get, or is that exclusive to your members?
The People Manager Toolkit is a member benefit.
Okay.
So obviously, if your organization, it's organizational or the individual membership. So maybe the second question after, do we have a workplace adjustments policy, is our organization a member of Business Disability Forum? Right. But we do have quite a lot of open source material as well. Okay. So on our website, which is businessdisabilityforum.org.uk, you'll find there's a disability essentials toolkit that's got loads of information on supporting disabled employees and customers. There's also a COVID-19 toolkit, which is still relevant in a lot of ways. And then lots of other bits and bobs. And we regularly have events that are free to attend to all. So if you're interested, sign up to our newsletter and our blog. There's a lot on there.
Brilliant, fantastic. So just as a final statement, then, is there any kind of final gem, a piece of information, like a nugget of information that you'd like managers to walk away with after this session today?
I'll give you another stat, which is, as well as thinking about, people think about wheelchair users, but people also think of disability as something present from birth. Only 17% of disabilities are present from birth. 83% are acquired. So it's very likely that people in your teams will acquire a disability. And this is about retaining talent as well as recruiting talent. Yeah. And I think, it's part of the human condition, disability. It doesn't discriminate. And no. And it's just, it can happen to any of us. It's probably happening in your team. So just have a conversation.
Yeah. Gosh, that's 83% of disability is acquired.
Yeah.
And is that at certain? Is there kind of more of a higher number at certain? Is it like pre-work years or post-work?
The highest concentration, apparently, of acquiring a disability is late 40s to early 50s. I saw 53 at one point. And of course, prevalence increases with age. So in over 65s, about 44% of people are disabled. Working age adults, it's about 19%. So this is not a tiny minority. This is actually a significant part of your workforce. And with skills shortages in so many sectors, I'm really pleased that businesses are realizing that they need everybody and they need the talent that disabled employees bring. So that's got to be a positive.
Oh, well, thank you so much for dedicating your career to supporting people, or everyone to thrive in the workplace, and supporting businesses to ensure that they're looking after anyone with disability in the business. I think it's absolutely crucial, your role. So thank you very much for everything that you dedicate, and thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you.
Thank you, Anna. It's been lovely. Thanks for having me.
All right then. Thanks, Diane. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.